I remember a long time ago in the congregation that I was serving in Quebec, sitting around and having a conversation with a number of people who were joining the church. And I forget how I framed the question exactly, but it was something like, so what do you think the role that God I have to find a word. What do you think is the role that God plays in your life? And I remember this older man saying, well, I think God provides a lot of calm and peace in my life. And I remember thinking at the time, and probably saying as much, that in most of the encounters that our tradition speaks of God engaging partnerships and people, the last thing that God brings to people's life is calm and peace. I think we live with a real paradox in this tradition. And that is that the foundational stories and those major events within the biblical text are not necessarily the mystery that we call God showing up and making everything better, but in fact showing up and interrupting people's lives in a big way, changing the course of their lives, challenging them, reorienting them. So you understand the task of the preacher is really quite challenging in this tradition, because on the one hand, I think we would like to be embraced by a God who's going to bring us peace and calm and joy and etc. And on the other hand, we have God confronting people within our sacred narrative, sweeping them off their feet and sending them to places that they would not go to otherwise. So, in looking for a sermon this week to preach, because I'm still a little under the weather, you can hear that in my voice, I went back, I thought, well, let's just go back to some of our foundational stories. One of them coming and recorded in the book of Genesis about Abram and Sarah. And I think our foundational stories, like I say, these are mythologies that we are meant to kind of live into and then look at, and then use as lenses through which to look at our own lives. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house and everything familiar to you, to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And through you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abraham went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him too. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And then fast forward to the New Testament, a very similar kind of story. As Jesus walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." And immediately they left their nets and followed him. As he went from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, in the boat with their father Zebedee, mending their nets. And he called them. And immediately they left the boat and their father and their familiar life and followed him. Let me share with you some words from the book by Richard Rohr, Falling Upwards, Spirituality for the Second Half of Life. The phrase two halves of life was first popularized by Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist. He suggests that there are two major tasks. In the first half of life, you've got to find your identity and your significance. You have to do what Rohr calls create your container. You get your education, you get a job, you may enter a relationship, you build a house, etc. In the second half of life, once you've created that structure of your life, you finally have the courage to ask, wow, now that I've arrived, what is it all for? What am I supposed to do with this? Am I supposed to protect it, defend it? Or am I here for some deeper purpose? Rohr suggests that the search for meaning is the task of the second half of life, which is not always a chronological matter. He says, I've met 11-year-olds in cancer wards who are already in the second half of their life. And I've met 68-year-old men like me who are still stuck in the first half, wondering about their next home renovation. What is interesting and almost paradoxical is that a certain amount of stability is required to successfully complete the first half of life. A person needs to develop healthy boundaries, a sense of safety, a sense of who they are and what their strengths are. With this early confidence, we move forward. We get our education, establish a family, and establish financial stability. But this is where the paradox comes in. In order to discover a richer sense and a deeper sense of God, we need to hear the call to move beyond that which is secure. And very often, though not always, very often that journey will be precipitated by suffering. A suffering that reveals a longing for something that container that we spend so much energy creating cannot provide. Or sometimes a tragedy forces us to come to terms with all of life's shades of gray. So let me share some stories with you as a means of getting you to think about where you are at. The first one is one that Rohr tells, and as a Catholic priest, he spent 14 years as a prison chaplain. He speaks about the men with whom he worked, men who had not been parented well, men who had never been given the tools they needed to work on the first half of their life. And therefore, they were kind of constantly stuck in a place of eternal adolescence. And as an American, he suggests that his own country may be stuck in a perpetual place of adolescence, constantly obsessed with issues around security and me first. But that's another story. Rohr also points out that it is important that we not see this work in terms of age. I have a very good friend who grew up with her mother going in and out of hospital with anorexia while she was still a child. She spent a lot of time with her grandparents during this period and witnessed the incredible suffering of both of her parents. But because she was held in that place by very caring and wise grandparents, she, as a very young person, became wiser than her years. Like the child in the cancer ward. I think about my mother, who lived a fairly interesting life as a nurse and a midwife, practicing her profession in 3 different countries, continents actually, before settling in as the public health nurse in her hometown in New Zealand. She was a member of the golf club and the tennis club and the bridge club and the church. From a distance, it seemed ideal. And so I couldn't, for the life of me, figure out why she would leave all of that to marry my father, a missionary, to live in less than ideal conditions, half a world away from family and friends. And yet she told us that when she made the decision to marry my father, it was part of how she felt was a larger call from God. A call to leave what she knew, to leave the secure world of family and friends and a paycheck, called to leave a world where there were lots of afternoon teas and white gloves, because she knew in the deep places within herself that there was something richer to be discovered in her journey. I don't think we always want to hear this, but the foundational core stories in our theological tradition, the one from the Hebraic tradition and then later from the church, involve an invitation to leave the familiar and to go on a journey that never promises safety, but promises something deep and profound. And it's not everyone who will hear this invitation. Let me say a bit more about this container that we create. Apart from all the signposts of physical and financial security, the job, the house, the role that you play in the larger community, it is also the container that holds our worldview, our faith perspective, our understanding of the way things work, and our set of values. And it is the contents of this container that is challenged when we are called to journey into the mystery. Because the call of Abraham and the call of the disciples was not just a call to leave the physical security of homeland and family. That was half of it. It was a call to embrace a very different worldview. It was a call to enter a territory that played by a very different set of rules, and we do not easily make that shift. In fact, it's very often a crisis that takes us there, because few of us would choose to jump into a place that is unfamiliar. We are most often pushed by some sort of loss or crisis. And I think there are probably two distinct ways of dealing with these kinds of crises. They can make you harder, more jaded, more frustrated. They can send you into a tailspin of fear and anxiety so that you respond with working overtime to reinforce your own container, your security, your belief system. Or you can choose to fall upwards into the mystery that we call God. It is unfortunate that our culture is so security-driven, image-driven, always inviting us to pay attention to the container. When the invitation came to Abraham, even at the age of 75, and the invitation of Jesus to the disciples involved moving to a place of vulnerability, a place of no longer knowing all the answers, a place of weakness, but in that weakness, we are told a unique strength. So during this time for contemplation, I invite you to consider where God may be calling you to let go. Let go of your striving. Let go of a way of thinking. Let go of having worked it all out. Let go of your traditional sense of security. Let go of your anxiety around aging. Let go of, in order to find yourself falling upwards into the arms of mystery.